Over to you.
Beth, thank you very, very much. And thank you, everybody, for having me along. Paul, just give me a thumbs up so I know I can be heard well. Yeah, Ashling's nodding. Thank you very much, Ashling. And Beth, thank you very much for the intro. So, first of all, let me get sharing onto the screen and let's make sure that's all working. So, exactly as Beth said, I worked in big P&G company for very, very many years. I've been doing training in this area for very, very many years, but I'm very aware. You are not my normal corporate group. You're highly experienced speakers, presenters, and especially in the virtual setting. So my request as we go through this is, yes, I've picked some specific bits. I've also played with some bits. What I want you to do is be curious, but also share your experience in chat, anything that you think would build on the stuff we're doing, great. But also challenge me because I might challenge you with some questions occasionally in terms of how we do some things. But challenge me, especially if you disagree. You know, something I say, you go, whoa, wait a minute, what do you mean? Tell me, because I absolutely love it when we get into those sorts of pieces, and we get more value when we do. Okay, so where do we start? Yeah, I worked at P&G for a good long time, 18 years in total, a mixture of sales, insights, learning and development, all sorts of things. And you go to a big company like that, and this is the myth of what presenting is like. But even back in the days of Microsoft Live Meeting, the reality was often much more like that. And how do you help people in that situation? And we know that increasingly, actually, especially post-COVID, the challenges people often had are often this horrible mix of face-to-face and virtual. Yes, I was a sales guy, an insights guy, an L&D guy, but out of those 18 years, I spent 15 years of it also on the side being a presentation skills coach and actually left to do that full time, been going 10 years. In fact, it's pretty much 10 years to the day. 10 years ago, plus about 3 days is when I set up the company and been going, making presentations is what we get into. But that's just a bit of background. What you want to know is what's the focus for our short time today. And this is it, actually. We're going to talk about design and we're going to talk about in virtual. What I want us to do is to design like a film director. An idea you may have heard in certain forms. I don't know. I've certainly come across it in various forms, but it's what I use as a core piece when it comes to designing the slides and the webcam. I want to encourage us all to design more like a film director. We're going to cover three things. First of all, a bit of webcam stuff. I'm going to check that we all know the same thing and then see if we do or don't. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the slides, just give you a couple of ideas there on how to be a bit more cinematic within the slide design. And then a bit time dependent, we'll get into some areas around slide movement. And if I really manage the time well, I'll talk about how we combine all three at the same time in what's called doing it the old way. But that's the plan. Webcams, static slides, movement slides. Let's start to work our way through. And we'll start with the webcam. Now, okay, we're experienced speakers. You are in literally the Professional Speaking Association virtual region session. You know how to do a lot of these things, but still, it's always worth asking. There's 5 different types of webcam setup, A, B, C, D, or E. Just give me a response in chat. Which is the right, or at least which is the best setup for the webcam? You are speaking to, it might be 10 people, it might be 10,000 people. Give me an answer in chat. Which is the way you would like your webcam to look? A, B, C, D, or E? Yeah, bang. There we go. Thank you. Phil got there first, but Rob, Paul, Jackie, Tina, we all know it's E. Some of you might have been tempted towards C briefly, but you all know it's E. We also all know we see all the other things in other people, but if you scan your eye across the webcams today, yeah, we've worked out what's good. We sort of know that there are things we need to avoid. We know that the left-hand side there is an issue, but I still see it day in, day out, people being set too low in the camera. And we know on the right-hand side is wrong because who wants to look domineering over the top? In a one-to-one meeting, you're grabbing your laptop, the right-hand side is fine. But if you're speaking professionally, you need to be set right. And what does that mean? Well, we know it means broadly eye level. It means broadly an arm's length apart is a very good principle to get into. So we know that. But let's start to get into some other areas where I'm hoping for a bit more debate, but we'll see. Okay, which background is best? The virtual, beautifully formed version on the left-hand side is A. Vote A if you want. Or you a fan of B, the real background where we can see cats and books and, everything else and be happily judging people for their choice of background. Oh, I love this group. Now, Rob, thank you for being honest, but my vote is very much for B as well as professional speakers. Yeah, I'm with Beth. I find the virtual ones distracting. It's the way hands disappear. I'm an enormous fan of sometimes actually bringing things into the camera, and I couldn't. If I did that with a virtual setting, that would just be a blur, and we wouldn't get anything from it. So I'm always my clients or clients, the people I train, I'm always encouraging them towards B rather than A. There are times when A is great. There are other times when A is needed, but B is what I'm hoping to do most of the time. Yeah, exactly as Aisling said, it's the halo. And yes, they've got better and better and better, but there's enough artifice going on. I want me to feel and look as realistic as possible. Okay, then, next one. Which background is best? A or B? Too much going on or not or nice and plain? Which one do we want to go for, boys and girls? Yeah. Thank you, Phil. So, I mean, I would actually consider this a slightly trick question. I think both of them are wrong. And I can see Ashling a little bit nodding, and I can see, and all the rest of it. I think, of course, A is wrong. I mean, I'm now you're probably judging my background because I'm always a little bit of a messy individual, but I'm deliberately not B because I think B is too plain. I think that then says too little. I think you should be in a position, you should be in a place. One bit of advice I got, which I really liked, is actually including try not to point towards a flat wall. Go to a corner. Beth's one is pointed to a corner. I quite like that. Or even Paul having the staircase gives a little bit of depth to what you have. You're trying to avoid being too flat in what you're doing, if at all possible. Sam's in a cupboard. And if Sam has been put in a cupboard, for whatever reason it is, Sam just needs to embrace the cupboard and do things with it. But do something with the background if you can, is what I would recommend. Whatever happens, people are judging you for what's behind you, but you might as well give them something interesting rather than absolutely nothing. Okay, final one, I think, in this set. Which lighting is worse, A or B there? Where A is completely diffuse standard light everywhere and B is a horrible shadow between. Thank you, Jess. Jess has got the idea. Jess knows how I think. So does Laura, so does Phil. They're both bad. We've mostly worked out that B is bad, but I still see too much stuff a bit like A. And this depends on platform. My lighting works much better in MS Teams than it does in Zoom. Zoom, I know it's hot, so I'm radiating, but actually I've had to do a few things with my light to get it better today because Zoom reacts to the light differently to MS Teams. But what you want is some light in different places. My favorite example of this, and I'd be interested, wave at me if you've seen this example before, because I'd be interested to find out. But who's seen this Gretchen Goldman? Give me a wave if you've seen this Gretchen example before. Okay, lovely. So this is COVID. So COVID times when suddenly everybody had to go virtual, and Gretchen is on CNN doing a short interview presentation on CNN. I mean, that comes with a level of pressure. And straight afterwards, you can see she looked well, but actually she spoke well, and she got a lot of praise on what was back then called Twitter. And being a class act, Gretchen actually admitted that her life was much more complicated than it looked. That was her post. And actually, if you bring that photo up, that was the reality she was in. It was a day rather like today. She was in cycling shorts. She was, a mother of young children during COVID, just doing the best she can. But you can see the choices she's made. She's got the camera at eye level. She's got light front and side. She's, still surrounded by the mess that many of us have around us. But she's making choices which make it so she's framed eye level, arm's length apart, but notice the background. It's beautifully set. It's interesting without being distracting. It's not a plain wall. There's a bit of depth there. Those things actually make you seem more real and more human, which are things we mostly want to do. So There's some webcam stuff. You probably knew much of that, but I still enjoyed the debate. Let me ask a slightly different question and let's get into setup. Sometimes we have to exist on one screen. I'm often on two. For the more complicated training we do, I'm on three screens. But here's my classic setup. You can see the key bits there. Let me put my pen on a second. So look, there's the webcams. There you are, all looking beautiful. Chat for me is almost always in the center. I have notes and other things there. Exactly what's down here might vary. I might have on exactly what Paul was showing us, being able to shift the view around of where I am in relation to the slides, or I might have participants. It varies, but I always have content, whether that's slides, a video, a survey, whatever it is I want to share out into the world, that's all held on a separate screen over here. So here's the question, which webcam is the right one to have as the active webcam? Do I want to have something over there or something over there? Give me A or B. Brilliant. So everyone's agreeing very quickly. So now give me an answer in chat in why. Why is A the right one? Why do I want to be looking there versus looking there? Yeah. Oh, no, Vinay, don't no problem with being late. You're just very welcome to have you. Yeah, absolutely right. The answers are great. Actually, again, as the answer with many of my questions, actually my camera is a little bit in the middle. I want it directly over wherever the cameras are. So when I'm looking at you, I'm looking at you. Because that's what you do in face-to-face. I don't put the slide in front of me and look at the audience. I have the slides behind me and then look at the audience. Then the audience knows when I'm talking to you and when I'm looking at the content. And that idea of similarities between virtual here to here and face to face here to here is actually useful, and it's a signal as there's enough that the audience is having to guess, give them that clarity of when am I looking at you and when am I looking at my content. But there are times where I will flip that across to there. There are some times where actually I want to be so content focused that actually I almost want to ignore the audience. The audience are there, but they're there to observe while I go full geek on something normally. And then sometimes I might shift it across. Or it's a 2 hour session and I just want to create a bit of variety of angle. In the same way as I might move across a stage and present from a different part of the stage to give a different angle. In virtual, I might sometimes move the camera to give a different perspective and just that freshness. So having a setup so you can move your camera around helps you to do that. And actually, that is a slightly out of date photograph of my setup. Just for out of interest, I've got a slightly different computer these days, but there's the content on the right. There's a camera I can move around. So Logitech Streamcam is the one I've used for at least 5 years. I've got an overhead camera, which if we have time, I'll show you later. So I've got shots from above me. I've got a separate camera angle. Lights bouncing around, one cheap light, one expensive light, to be honest. So I've got a bit of variety on there. A decent microphone, of course. I'm also a great fan of a really good speaker. Not only do I want everyone to hear me well, I want to hear them well. So actually, I've got an old but good Bose speaker in front of me, hardwired in, so I hear everyone else as clearly and as well as possible. Yeah, Jackie, I absolutely, yeah, I've one of the best purchases I ever made was within that. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so webcam. I'll take a breather, but there's some things on the webcam. And look, it's great to see how consistently we have the right sort of ideas. And it's then how we put those things into practice in the ideas that we put across. Okay, so there's some bits on webcam. Have you had to buy a new charge for your Bose Mini? Oh, very good, Phil. Yes, I had to buy a new battery for it about 4 years ago. Unfortunately, I knew someone who knew how to solder in a new battery because they do die eventually. But that is not what the rest of you have joined for, but it's a good question from Phil. Okay, webcam done. Let's move on to the next topic. And let's shift from orange into green and let's talk about slide design. And I've said that what we want to do in virtual is design like a film director. Well, let's start. We've originally been talking about webcam and how the star looks good. Now let's think about the screen. As I'm talking about static use of images on slides, how do I think cinematically here? How do I think like a film director when we're talking about the screen? Because look, there's some nice text, there's a nice image. Bob's your uncle. Are we done? So let's see. I'm interested. How do I make this more cinematic? Or, in a simpler terms, what would a film director do to make this more visually engaging? Again, answers in chat. Give me one idea in chat about what you might do to a slide like this to make it more cinematic. Andy, I love Andy's answer, but we're going to get to movement later. In purely static form, what might you do? Vinay, full page. Add depth. Change the green surround. Depth and layers. Lovely. Some really smart answers here in terms of what we're talking about. So yes, it's getting a little bolder in terms of what you do. I don't know what you mean by cinematic. Rob, thank you for the question. Thinking more like a film director. A film director won't put everything into the middle distance. A film director will deliberately sometimes pull back the camera and sometimes deliberately pull in the camera, and they'll be very specific where they're placing things on the screen. When I'm in face to face, often I think I'm the most important visual tool walking around that space. But in virtual, I'm constrained here, so I've got to create more visual interest on the slide itself. So the sorts of things we mean are the sort of stuff we're seeing in chat. Things like going bigger, really starting to stretch and fill the space, or even deliberately going really in, super zoom in. That's the sort of thing that a film director is going to consider to give it power, because I want to hold your attention at times. Or being brave enough to go the other way, pull back. You're all sat next to your own screen, managing your own distance. I don't have to worry about visibility from the back of the room in the same way as I might do in face to face. So sometimes I might go smaller. And actually, sometimes what I might do is change angles. If you look, the higher the energy in a scene, the more likely the film director is to put something on an angle to give energy. And maybe that's the sort of thing you can play with. Make sure you haven't got 52 different angles going on. The shift key is very helpful on that. But just sort of maybe play with angles. And in the end, it doesn't matter which direction you go in, but look at your work. And is everything looking like it's in the mid distance? Because what a film director would do is go, no, when am I coming in close? When am I pulling back? And when am I shifting at an angle to give a greater sense of visual interest? And sometimes it's just to pull the attention crisply into what's going on the screen. The other thing I loved the answers, Phil's changed the green surround. I like that sense of change. The thing that we talk to people about is it's contrast. How do I create greater contrast? Not all the time, because that's just noise, but create sensible contrast. I can create contrast in a number of ways. I can do it through color, obviously. I can do it through light to dark. I can do it through going big and going small. And it's just looking for opportunities to make sure there's enough contrast changes happening, at least every so often. Face to face, I can pull attention in and make it. No one's going to fall asleep in front of me face to face. But in virtual, I might want to add a bit more visual contrast into the slide design to really help pull people in. This is a screenshot of the slides you're going through at the moment. You can see key contrast moments going on there. They're not an accident. Yeah, some of it's for clarity of section, but a lot of it is making sure there are moments where there's a big shift. If you're designing a film, you enjoy going from a dark scene to a light scene for that contrast shift and the energy pull you get from that. Face to face, to be blunt, who cares? Virtual, you should care. Okay, let's talk about images. Sometimes we've got to show people real things. And one way to do it is to show them a real thing. There's an actual photograph of the Mona Lisa. Is that the best option, or are you better diving into ChatGPT like we all do and getting it to give you an image? Or is it better to sort of have some pre-prepared image that way? Or you get an option D here. Option D is, should you have hand-drawn something and wave it at the camera? Give me an answer in chat. Which do you think is best for virtual? Phil, yes, good, lovely, 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 lovely. I love the PSA. So, perfect. It does depend. But actually, what I'd love to challenge you to do is to be using a range of these things. If you're someone who just uses real photographs, I would have a bit more variety in virtual. I'd at least encourage it. If you're only using ChatGPT, unless you've got very good at it, the images start looking a bit samey. I'm really encouraging you actually a bit more to consider C and D. The world is full of perfection these days. I think the professional should be good enough to be imperfect. And I think in images, I think there's an absolutely great opportunity. This is an image I got from Shutterstock at least 10 years ago, a long time ago. It's a great image. I still sometimes use it, but actually sometimes I want something very specific. Now in the ye olden new days, there's a illustrator I use called John Cooper who I got to create this image because I could scribble it badly, give it to John, and what comes back to me is exactly what I want. But ChatGPT and the like is enabling us to do it. But we're all smart enough to know that that's not a good image. It's just the first image that ChatGPT gave me when I gave it a fairly obvious select of prompts. Get good at starting to prompt it, to evolve it. And then you can do some really good things to pull color out and things. So you end up with something quite good. But my big message for you all in this short session is be brave enough to do that. I think more of that is useful. That I get exactly, I can see smiles on. Now, I've got to set my credibility high early on. I may not start with the terrible drawing, but I can tell you that people actually react nicely to imperfection. And it's actually more interesting when they've a little bit got to work out what it is you've drawn. So if you're someone who's always relying in virtual, especially on ChatGPT sort of AI type images, or even old Shutterstock type sort of bought images, be brave. Be brave enough to actually create bad things. That is demonstrably a bad drawing of the Mona Lisa, but you're more likely to remember and engage with that, I would say, than most of the other options I gave you. Okay, so there's a couple of thoughts on static slide design. Be more cinematic, be much bolder and more adventurous in how you use images on the slides, but then be bold in the other direction. Be ready to be rubbish with the image. Still find opportunities to bring bad or even some of you might be able to draw quite good images in as well. And I think that combination in virtual works very strongly. Yeah, I really like the way Beth puts it. Good enough to be imperfect is something to reflect on. I think sometimes that comes with real stuff. Okay, let's get into the final section of the three I definitely wanted to cover. It was around movement. And I love the answer to one of my questions earlier. Yeah, exactly. Andy's first answer was movement. The best way of keeping a screen engaging is to have it moving and changing. One of the earliest tips I developed for virtual in the course I designed in 2007 was in face-to-face, you probably want fewer slides, rely on yourself more and maybe a flip chart. But in virtual, you often want more slides because I want more things going on but then if I'm using more slides, they've got to be moving the eye around. It can't all just be staring at the middle of a slide. So what are we going to go with? In virtual design, like a film director, what's a director going to do is it pulls back and tries to make sure that idea that he's sharing is interesting. Well, what we certainly know is a film director will not place all the information in a single position on the slide because that would be dull. That is definitely those old enough to remember 3D cinema coming in, and we all got very bored at looking at the center of the screen all the time. What are they going to do? The film director chooses to flow the information around the screen to connect with the story being told. So here's a creative opportunity for it. And this is tricky to do in a short amount of time, but I'm still interested. If you've got time to write it down, great. But otherwise, just in your own head, how do you plan the following shots? You are filming a Sherlock Holmes mystery. You've got 6 shots to plan. Lady arrives at 221B Baker Street. Lady sits opposite Sherlock Holmes. Lady starts to cry as she tells her story. Lady continues to tell story as Sherlock smokes pipe. Sherlock smiles. The game is afoot. Something falls off. And Lady leaves 221B Baker Street. If you've got time to scribble a few notes into chat, that would be brilliant. But at least in your own mind, have a think about your filming that. How are you designing those shots? Because being more cinematic in virtual means actually thinking a little bit more like a film director in what you are doing. Okay, you've had a chance to have a think. You're a brave. Aisling, I'm going to come to you, partially because I've talked to you recently. Aisling, come off mute. What's in your head? How would you plan this shot? And it looks like Andy might be helping you in chat.
Um, yeah, so I think, yeah, like Andy says, wide angle, like walking up to the door, seeing camera more than likely behind her as she arrives.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
then it kind of jumps to her being there. So we don't, so we would need some kind of walking in the door.
Yeah, don't overthink it, Ashling. Just sort of give me sort of snapshots.
Oh,
I,
oh,
I,
oh,
I
no.
agree, but give me simpler.
Oh, you've asked an overthinker the wrong
I
question.
know,
So in
I
that case,
realize.
right, okay. So lady sits opposite Sherlock Holmes. So you're going to have to show who, yeah. So the camera's probably going to be over her shoulder with you seeing him.
Maybe.
Um,
Yeah, okay.
because if she's, because you'll have already seen her approach, so you'll know what she looks like. Um, so camera pans around then to show her being emotional,
Yep.
as she speaks. Um, she'll have to get up and leave then, so the camera's going to have to follow her out the door.
Yep. So you've got sort of jumped there with it, a couple of things in it. Okay, Ashling, thank you very, very much. If I
Oh,
had
sorry,
longer,
I went the wrong way around.
no,
Apologies.
no, no. I should have made that arrow clearer. But you get we can sort of do it. And Aisling actually, to be honest, is a better film director clearly than most. She's busy actually thinking about the shots between the shots. But we sort of know intuitively what should be done. Vinay's given us a great answer here. Yeah, shot from behind as she walks to the door, follow her to the chair, slow focus on the face for the Sherlock's reaction. It is. It's this when you're behind, when you brought. Now, you are all better film directors than I need you to be at this moment because I'm going to go a bit simpler. But you need an establishing shot. Shot of 221B Baker Street, there's a lady arriving. You need a master shot which sets up the sense of space in the scene so the audience, then you get into over the shoulder shots. But first of all, you need a shot so you know who's left, who's right and what's in the room. Because then you can zoom in closely to her as she cries, read back into master shot, zoom back into him as he smiles, the game is afoot, bring back, and then maybe some shot here of him seeing her leave. You choose the shot, but it's that broad in further and out, which we're so used to. In virtual, I think we can do much, much more of that and get great value because we're all staring at a screen. So the sort of thing I teach my clients to do, which is quite different to the sorts of presentations you're probably doing. But I teach my clients, if you're introducing a new line of Head and Shoulders, great, introduce it. There it is. Yeah, that can be central. But then if you're comparing it to another product, set up left and right. There's Supreme Moisture on the left. There's Smooth and Silky on the right. So then if I'm giving you more detail about Supreme Moisture, keep it on the left. There's a bit of color connection points which are helping as well. If I'm then broadening back out to then go in and start talking about Smooth and Silky, it's on the right-hand side because we should know it should be on the right-hand side. And then set up the two-shot master shot again. It's just being a little bit more conscious. I don't think of the screen as being just something which is full of images. Think of it as a space that you're moving your audience around is the thought I would give you in the design, and can make real differences. It's nice to do in face-to-face, but in virtual it becomes even more vividly important in terms of what it's doing. Yeah, Vindy, first two shots sets the context and then you pull the viewer in. Lovely, 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 lovely. Okay, final bit around here is other forms of movement, and sort of some of the ones we absolutely know is we all know that we're cats, so the audience are cats. You're all looking in the circle, you're all looking in the diamond, unless you're deliberately being annoying because you know what I'm doing and therefore you're fighting against it, which is, you know, what you might be doing, but that's your choice, good for you. But finding ways of creating movement in terms of what you're doing in virtual. I'm amazed at how few, maybe you all do know this, but do you know what some of the shortcuts are? Do you know that in, at least on a laptop, Microsoft laptop, control left mouse button actually brings up the laser pointer automatically. I know I could just use the pointer, but control plus left mouse button gives me that. Do you know that? Do you know that you can press plus and zoom in and pan around? That can be a useful thing to create movement in terms of what you're doing. You've got some options in here. But obviously what we want to avoid is this. You know, we all, in our clients, we see a lot of this. Good luck knowing where you're supposed to look. So movement is about clarity, but movement is also about being cinematic. This is a model I train on around how to make a message memorable. And look, I could put it all on the screen at one time, but there's advantage in building simple, then trusted, then OMG, then repeated, then emotive, and then drawable. There's value in that in terms of what it's doing and finding different ways to do it, whether it's through builds or whether it's through other pieces in terms of what it's doing. Get good with using the pen. So movement. The big idea is think more cinematically, move people consciously around the screen. But yeah, add pens, add animations, add laser pointers. That movement really helps. You've liked it when I've written on the screen and stuff like that. Okay, I'm coming to the end of time, so I will keep things simple and just summarize here. There was some other thing I might have shown, but we're coming to time, so I ask if anybody wants me to show some other stuff. I've got an overhead camera I've not had quite a chance to share in the way that I might have done. So if anybody wants to know about the overhead camera, write to me and I'll show you the sort of stuff that I do. But briefly to summarize, we've talked about the webcam. We've talked about how just some core aspects around framing and light, but also giving an opportunity for what you do here. And my other thing is use it as an opportunity to bring visuals into that screen. We've talked about static slides. How do you make sure that those static slides are more cinematic? Think like a film director. Be bolder in how you use the images and then deliberately be bad with some badly drawn ones. And find ways to bring movement in. And yes, animation, builds, videos, do that. But actually be brave to think about it as being a space that you're moving people around more than just a space for sort of images to be put. Thank you very much. That's the main idea in virtual design, more like a film director in what you're doing. There's a book I'll flog you if you want me to, but really I'm at time. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening and especially for your ideas in chat and Aisling for bravely being brought forward. Thank you very much.